There it is. Okay. Now I'm going to have that, and that audio is going to be in the back, and I know I have a very soft, gentle voice. Be careful there. I think this is going to be a disaster. So I'm going to also have the audio here. Does somebody see my recorder? Okay. I wasn't trying to scare you, right? Thank you. Music. No, I don't want to go there. Oh, it works. Good. Incredible. So we're there. Let me shut the light off. Okay, what we're going to do this week, is I'm going to talk about a little bit about last week. I'm going to learn some stuff. What I'm trying to do here is get you to understand some basic, when you look at things in economics, understand some of the basic things that are going on so that you can then think about how to analyze in mathematical statistical analysis. Because what we do as economists, we are scientists, economists is social science, and what we do is we have a hypothesis, we develop theory, and then analysis, testing, then testing, and then you modify it, you go back and modify the hypothesis. So that's kind of the thing. So I present theory. The purpose of theory is to understand, to get an understanding of the way reality can work, and then know how to analyze it. So it's not just to learn some facts and all, it's to learn how to think. So how to think in theory so that you can test. And that's the purpose here. We want to learn how to do that. Now the interesting thing is when I look back, and if you, for those of you, I think some of you have notes from my lecture last year. And in fact, I did send you lecture notes this week. This is going to be completely different, completely changed. Most of these different, completely different notes. And the reason is that I went back and I looked and I said to myself, you know, when you teach, there's a lot that you learn. And one of the things I realized was that there were things I didn't understand. I thought I understood it, and I realized I didn't really understand it as well as I thought I did. So I went back, and I've completely redone this. And hopefully you can understand better because I understand it better. And so I'm going to go over a little, because actually I did find a mistake that I made last week. I did make mistakes. And but what we're interested in, we're interested in responses to change. We're basically interested in how people respond, how we respond to changes. And I said we start out, we respond to changes in our physical environment. What happens if it's cold? You put on a jacket, that's your response. If it's warm, you dress lightly. It starts raining, you pull out your umbrella. Those are reactions to changes in the environment. We also respond to changes in our economic environment. The price of something rises, we buy less of it. That's what the law of demand. Talk about the law of demand. Prices rise, we buy less. price falls, we buy more. That's a reaction. If our income goes up, we either buy more or less of a good. And that's what we're interested in response to that change. If we increase our consumption of one good, we may consume more or less of another good. It depends on whether the goods are substitutes or complements. I mentioned computers, and I'll give the example of computers. If we buy a computer, or if we buy a better computer, we're going to probably buy more software. If we buy more computers, we're going to buy more software. Those are complements. But if we buy more wheat, we're probably going to buy less rice. If we buy more bread, we're probably buying less rice. So those are our changes. That's if we increase our consumption. And so now last week I introduced some various economic and environmental changes and analyzed the potential consumption of response to. I'm going to continue that, and then I'm going to introduce a mathematical approach to measuring those. What I'm talking about is just a general discussion about what these effects are. And then I'm going to show you mathematically how we put numbers on that and tell it so that we can actually statistically measure it and put a number so that we can understand numerically what's happening. So I'm going to review the concepts we introduced in the last lecture. And I'm putting it in this order because this is what actually makes sense. I talked about three things: the price effect, the substitution effect, and the income effect. Price effect, that's very clear. It's what happens when the price of something changes. That's that basic demand curve. The demand for a good if the price of the good changes. And the important thing to remember, and I don't have it written here, I think I will, just to make that, that's holding the other effects constant. That's with no substitution effect and no income effect. So that's before any of those changes. That's just a basic change with nothing else changes. And that's the thing to remember, is that we need, when we see any kind of chart in economics, what we need to know is what we're changing and what we're holding constant. That's very important to remember. So the price effect, that's what happens to the demand for a good. The price of that good changes. And that's holding the substitution effect and the income effect constant. The substitution effect, what happens to the demand for a second good if the price of the first good changes, holding the income effect constant. So we're not looking at the income effect. The income effect is something we consider is separate. An income effect is what happens to the demand for a good if one income changes, holding the price effect and the substitution effect constant. So it's like you're standing in a street corner, it starts raining, the light turns green, you pull your umbrella out. Do you walk first, or do you go, there's traffic turning? In other words, there's different things going on. So we want to know, there's different things that are happening. How do you respond to the different things? So let's say that we're standing in the street corner, and when across the street it starts raining and the traffic is turning. Well, we're going to do, what do we do if there's no traffic? It's just, there's no traffic, okay, there's no rain. Well, then we just walk across the street. If there's rain, we pull out our umbrella and walk across the street. If there's traffic turning, well, then we do something differently. Those are all different things that go on. So in the same way here, we have the price. These are different factors. These are different things that have different impacts on the amount of goods that we consume and our response to changes in price. So what we're doing here is we're separating them all out so we can clearly understand them. And ultimately, what we want to do is to be able to test and analyze and get data to see what happens in the real world. We want to get real world data to measure all of these things to the degree that we can. So that's the purpose of what we're doing. And I'm going to go back as I started this, and as I say, and I'll show you where I thought about it. I realized I really made a mistake when I presented it to you. And but this is the change. This is the price effect is exactly the same. The price effect, we move from A to B. And here the price is falling. Here the price is falling. It's the movement along the demand curve. As the downward sloping demand curve, it's the movement as the price changes. And that's a movement along the demand curve. And that's assuming everything else is constant. Everything else is constant. Only the effect of the change in price. And then we have the substitution effect. Substitution effect is what describes what happened with demand. If you go back to the notes, I throw that out. I didn't present that to you correctly. The substitution effect describes what happens with demand for a second good with the change in the price of the first good. So what happened? We know what happened. There's a price effect. There's a change in demand with the change in price of the first good. For example, here we go from 50 to 30, but the demand increases from 5 to 7. So we know the change in demand. That's the price effect. But there's also a substitution effect. The substitution effect involves a second good, or some third good, or other goods. Here, the second good, in this case, the demand declines. The demand falls. And what this and the term we use, and I'll mention more about this later, is the demand shifts. There's a shift in demand for the other good in response to the change in the price of the first good. That's the substitution effect. And depending upon the direction, if it goes this way, if the demand for the second good falls, then what that means is we're substituting these are substitutes. Substituting this good for this good because we're consuming more of this good. So this is an example of substitutes. We keep this clear. The substitution effect and substitutes are two different things. Don't get confused about those. The substitution effect says what happens with demand for a second good with the change in the price of the first good. Goods are substitutes if the price of the first good drops and the price of the demand, the amount of consumption of the second good falls, then you've substituted one for the other. On the other hand, if it complements, if the price of one good falls, which means we consume more, that's what happens on a downward sloping demand curve. That's the law of demand. And then demand for the second good increases because we consume them together. They're the same. They're basically a pair. They're a paired. They're in some ways they're actually part of the same good. And software and computers are a great example. The price of computers falls, we're probably going to consume more software. So we're going to consume more computers, we're going to consume more software. That's a complement. But if it's the price of wheat drops, the price of bread falls, we'll probably consume less rice. Those are substitutes. And I go into that. I describe that. That's exactly what I said. Now, in both of these cases, we're holding the income effect constant. In both cases, we're holding the income effect constant. And what is the income effect? The income effect talks about our effective, the change in income that happens when the price of something changes. For example, like here, last semester I bought this for 110. Now it's 120. But at least they have it. But they didn't. But the price has gone up to 120. That means I have 10 less yen. When I buy it, I have 10 less yen. That's an income effect. I have 10 yen less. Now it's not a lot, but it's not zero. That means I have less money in my pocket. I have less money to spend on other things. Okay. So the income effect would say, I have to reduce, it's going to affect the consumption of something else. It's going to, because the price has gone up, so it's going to affect the consumption of something else because I have less money to spend on other goods. But that also depends upon what my reaction to it is. And the problem for me is I like this so much that at 120 I still buy the same amount. So for me, I'm going to buy the same amount, so that means definitely I have less money. That's the income. I know I have less income because the price of this went up. So think about that when the price, how your reaction to a price change. So your reaction, and that's the income effect. That's another entire thing. We're going to go through this very carefully so that you can see the different effects. And I'm going to have exercises so that you can, it's going to seem a little bit complicated at first. You're going to go, it's going to be, what's going on here? But it's I'm going to show you step by step how you think about all these different effects and how they all add up to the full effect that you observe in the world. So that's what we're looking for, is you observe something in the world, but actually there's different effects that are underneath it. And what we're doing here is we're separating out those different effects so we understand each one, because each one has a different economic meaning. They each have something different that we need to consider as economists. It's not just one thing, it's each separate things, and you'll see how separate they are. The income effect is the change in the price of the good. As I said here, my consumption of this isn't going to change. It's 10 yen. That means I have 10 less yen. That's an income. I have 10 less yen. Let's say here, the price here, this good, it doesn't matter what good's the good. Don't worry about what it is. Price of 2. I'm sorry, the price of 80, I consume 2. I'm spending 160. 80 times 2 is 160. If the price falls to 50, from 80 to 50, in this range, if the price falls from 80 to 50, I'm going to consume 5 units. So 5 units of my income effect. I'm now spending 250. So I'm really happy. I'm happy to do it. This tells me I want to do it. I wanted more. Oh great, they dropped the price. Great, I'm buying 3 more. But I'm spending 250 now. Not spending 160. I'm spending more. And remember, we're holding income, we're holding everything else constant. Everything else constant. So when this happens, I have 90 less to spend on something else. So it means I have to reduce the consumption of something else. I have to. I have less money. I'm happy because this is what I want. I do want this. But as part of wanting this, I have, without my income, any other change, I have less money to spend. So that means I have to change my behavior. And this is one of the things that we're considering. What we want to consider is when the price of something changes, it affects our consumption of something else. And that's the thing to remember. Nothing is separate. We want to look at how that changes. And here, I have less money, so I have to spend less on something else. Here is a negative income effect. Here is an example of a positive income effect. Same good, the price drops further, and it drops from 50 to 30. My consumption goes from 5 to 7. I'm happier now. I'm even happier. I'm just as happy. I'm happy with this. So I'm happy with this. Now I want 7. I'm happy as I can be. I'm buying 7. And I'm spending only 210. So I'm spending less than here. Now I have more money to spend. Now what's interesting is that I've moved, this is the same good, I've moved along the demand curve. And I've gone, first my income effect is negative, and then the price drops further, and then it's positive. So the income effect turns positive. Now I have more money, which means I have more money to spend on something else. So this is, and the point here is that this is my behavior. I'm happy with all these changes. I'm responding to these changes, and I am happy with all of them. This is what I want. This is the response that I want to this change. I observe that change in the price. I go out and I get more. That's what I want. But in doing that, at first I have to give something up, and then later on I can get more as the price drops. So that's the income effect. So we want to keep that straight. And now, and this is the example I talked about, a substitute good. A substitute good, this is the substitute, the effect, that's the price effect. It's the substitution effect. And it's a substitute good that results from the substitution effect. In this case, the price drops in the first good, the consumption of the second good falls. It's because I'm consuming more of this, and because I'm consuming more of that, I want less of that. The price of Coca-Cola drops, I consume less Pepsi. Because unless I'm going to drink, I might end up, and maybe now it's also possible that I could drink more Coke. but at least the substitute, I'm going to give up some, I'm consuming more Coca-Cola, so I'm consuming less Pepsi. That's the substitute. That would make those substitutes. But here's an example. This is the substitution effect for complements. These are complements. The first good, the price falls. The second good, the demand shifts. It shifts to the right. The amount I consume increases. It's the demand. My demand is shifted to the right. For the second good, in response to the change in the price of the first good. That's a complementary good, and this is the substitution effect. Again, substitution effect and substitution of good are two different things. This is the substitution effect for complements. And also, we can group for the income effect in two categories: normal goods and inferior goods. And a normal good is an increase in income results in an increase in the consumption of the good. And a decrease in income results in a decrease in the consumption of the good. A normal good might be a sports car. The more money I have, I might not own a sports car. I don't own any cars, so I'll just make it as well. But if I wanted to buy a sports car, I would, if I had more income, I might buy one. That means it's a normal good. And if I make a lot more, then I might go out and buy a Ferrari. And that's another real one. That's a kind of normal good. But that's what that means. That means my income goes up, I buy more of it. That's a normal good. Inferior good is an increase in income results in a decrease in the consumption of the good. And a decrease in income results in an increase in the consumption of good. Anybody think, what's an inferior good? Can you think of an inferior good that comes to mind? Think for a few seconds and think about inferior good. And I can think of one that people consume billions and billions of cups of this stuff, and it's a cup of noodle. You know, your cup of noodle ramen. Imagine that if suddenly you got you're a student, maybe you eat a lot of cup of noodle ramen. There's actually a cup of noodle museum. Does anybody know that? There's a cup of noodle museum in Oklahoma. My wife and daughters went to it a couple of weeks ago. They brought back stuff. It's funny stuff. But billions of this. There's an incredible amount of cup of noodle that's consumed in this country. But I think if you went out and suddenly you're making 15 million yen a year, I'll bet you're going to consume less cup of noodle. You're not going to consume as much cup of noodle. You're going to be eating a lot more, teppanyaki. You're going to be, you're going to be going to Ginza, the best, sushi restaurants. You're going to give up. That's the point. That is an inferior. That's an inferior good. When your income goes up, you're going to get. That's the first thing that you get rid of. That's the kind of. So that's what we call an inferior good. Now, the thing to remember, in both these cases, we're holding the price effect and the substitution effect constant. Those don't. The price doesn't change, and we're not ignoring the substitution effect. That's just the effect of a change in income. Okay. So, let's look at this. Now what I'm going to do, okay, so this is a normal good, yeah, so this is graphically, so just go over this, you see what this is. The first good, the holding price effect and substitution effect constant, examples of normal goods, income increases, they both increase. Those are both normal goods. Inferior goods, these are the inferior goods, the price, the incomes go up, and the consumption goes down. Those are inferior goods, so that's just graphically an example of that. Now what we're going to do is, I want you to listen carefully. And what I'm so happy with this class this year is that all of you are awake. And this is wonderful because I've had students, and you're also sitting more at the front. I used to have those two tables were occupied by the people who were napped, and a miracle happened at 2:50. you know, a miracle happened at 2:50. They woke up, and I really would. You're all awake. I'm really happy to see. I'm delighted. So pay attention. This is going to be very important. I'm going to talk about two goods, wheat and rice. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put numbers. I'm going to put numbers. I'm just making these numbers up. I don't know. But you'll see there's kind of the outcome at the end is going to, it'll make some sense. Let's say wheat and rice. And we're going to look at the decline of price effect. We're going to assume a decline in the price of wheat from 50 to 30. We're just going to say they've got the same basic demand curve, the same demand curves, just to keep it simple. So we're going to look at the price. The price of the wheat drops from 50 to 30. Don't worry what the 50 to 30 means. It's just numbers. Don't worry about that. Now we're going to make an assumption about the substitution effect. Here's what our substitution effect. So what happens with the price of the change in the consumption? If we consume one more unit of wheat, we'll consume one less unit of rice. It's pretty simple. Instead of eating, if I eat 2 more slices of bread, I consume 1 less bowl of rice. That makes sense. If I decrease 1 unit of wheat, I increase my consumption of rice. I need to eat a certain amount. Those seem to be reasonable things. Now I'm going to look at an income effect. I'm just making this up, but I suppose for many people this might be similar. That if my income goes up, or if my income changes, 75% of the change will be spent on wheat, and 25% spent on rice. So my assumption here is that my income goes up by 10 units, then 75% of that increase, that increase, will go to spending on wheat. And similarly, the price, if the income falls, if the income effect decreases, then 75% of that decrease will be taken from wheat, and 25% from rice. So this is kind of the idea is that rice is a bit of an inferior good, and wheat is a bit of a normal good. That's kind of statistically, there's some evidence that that's the case. So that's where that assumption is. So we're going to look at those assumptions, and we're going to start with the price of that, because that's where it starts. And then we're going to look at all the different changes and see where we end up. And so all these 3 different effects, and we're going to put them one after the other to see how they work together to produce the change that we see in the world when we collect data on price changes. So we've got that. We've got that change from 50 to 30. So there's a substitution effect. The substitution effect. We're consuming 2 more units of wheat. We go 5 to 7. Well, that means we've increased by 2 units. That means we're going to consume 2 less. It means we may be eating a week. We need 4 more slices of bread, and we're going to consume 2 less bowls of rice. Something like that. So that's our substitution effect. We're consuming, because the price of wheat has fallen, we're consuming less rice. That's the substitution effect. Now the substitution effect produces both the price effect and the substitution effect produce changes in income. So we want to look at what those changes in income are. The price effect for wheat, right, we've spent 250, now we spend 210. That means our income has increased by 40. 250 minus 210, our income has gone up 40. We're consuming 2 less units of rice. Well, if we're consuming less, that means we're spending less. That means we have more income. We're increasing our income. So now we have a net income change of 250. Now, after the change, 150. Remember, the price of rice doesn't change. We're looking at the price of rice being constant. So we have 100 more to spend. So our net, and what we're doing here is we're just looking at these 2 goods. Forget about everything else. We're only spending money on these 2 goods. Nothing else matters here. We're only looking, and let's just assume that there's not a good. That's all we do. Either we go out, we consume bread or wheat or rice. That's it. It's not a very boring, not a very interesting life, but you know, but just keep that in mind. Forget about everything else. Just everything else constant. Just these two goods. Our total income effect, we have 140 more to spend. Now what we're saying is we're going to spend that extra 140 on these two goods. So we have 140 more. We have to spend it on something. And if there's only the two goods, we have to spend it on these two goods. And what we're saying is we're going to spend 75% of that extra 140 on wheat, and we're going to spend 25% of that extra 140 on rice. Okay, so now we'll look at that effect. And that effect, because remember, now with the income effect, now we have this price, we have 30. The price doesn't change. It's going to change our consumption. We've got 140 to spend. 75% of that means we spend 105 more on wheat. So we're going to spend 105 more. We have 105 more to spend on wheat as a result of the income change. 40 of which is from spending less money on wheat, and 100 from spending less money on rice. We're going to spend 105 more of that 140 on wheat. So that means 105 units, the price is 30, because remember the price fell. It's not 50 anymore, it's 30. So we spend 3.5 units more. So we're going to buy, the income effect means that we consume 3.5 more units of wheat. Now let's look at rice. The consumption effect, it's positive, in this case it's positive. We're going to spend more money on rice. Now it doesn't mean we actually consume more rice. It doesn't mean we consume more wheat. We just might buy better bread. We might buy a higher, instead of buying white bread, it might buy a German bread or French baguettes or something, we might just improve the quality. It might be that kind of, maybe 3.5 units of quality, however you want to measure it. So that's a possibility. And rice, that could be, if you can mix different things in rice, and you might buy more of the different things that you mix in rice to make it more healthy, which my wife does, and put all this stuff in. So that's what I mean. It could be just even more or less than that. So the rice, the expenditure change for rice, 25%. We're spending 35 more on rice. So the amount of expenditure on rice as a result of the income effect from the initial change in the price of wheat is 35 when we buy 0.7 units more rice. So we've gone, here's the income effect for wheat. It goes from, we increase from 3, 5, 7 to 10.5. So that's the end, is the total effect of the initial change in the price of wheat, just holding everything else constant on this demand curve, when we end up on a new demand curve that shifts out because of the change in income. And we're consuming rice here at 10.5, so we've increased our total, as the total increase in consumption of rice, and most of it is the income effect here, most of the income effect, we're consuming 5.5 units more. Income effect here, we consume 2 less units of rice from the substitution effect, but 0.7 more from the income effect. So our total consumption has dropped 1.3 units. That's the total effect. That's the total consumption effect of the change in the price of wheat. And look at this and think of how that the price of wheat has dropped, the price of rice has stayed the same. We consume more units of rice, less units of wheat, or more units of wheat, less units of rice, but our total, there's more units of, our consumption of wheat goes up more than our consumption of rice goes down. That makes sense. Price of wheat has dropped. We can still end up consuming more, across the two goods we're consuming more. Now we're going to look at the effect of the price increase of wheat. Now we're going to walk and say, well, what happens the other way? The price effect in the other direction. The price goes up to 70, 50 to 70. Let's say it goes up from 50 to 70. Okay, that's the effect. That's the price effect. Initial change, that's on that page. And the other assumptions are exactly the same. The substitution effect is staying the same, the income effect stays the same. Keeping those changes exactly the same, and we're going to look at just the change in prices. How we change the changing prices. Now, the income effect here, the price of wheat has risen, so we're consuming 2 less units of wheat. Well, if we consume less wheat, the substitution effect tells us we're going to consume more rice. We're consuming 2 less units of wheat, so we're consuming 2 more units of rice. That's the substitution effect. Price effect on the wheat, because they're substitutes, because the substitution works in both directions. If 2 goods are substitutes, the price of one goes down, the other one, the price of the first good drops, the consumption of the second good drops. If the price of the first good rises, the consumption of the second good rises. That's the substitution effect for substitutes. Okay? So, and we can see the income effect. The income effect here is our spending on wheat goes from 250 to 210. That's an increase. We have 40 more, just like before. The interesting thing, we go in the opposite direction, but the same thing happened. It just happened. That's just what happened there. It could go up, it could go down. In this case, it was the same effect as before. That happens to be that. If you choose different numbers, something different is going to happen. But look at the rice. Now, we were spending 250 before, we're consuming 2 more, so we're spending 350. We're spending more on rice, because the price of rice doesn't change. Remember that, we're holding the price of rice constant. We're only looking at the effect of the change in the price of wheat. We're spending more on wheat, 100 units more, so we have less income overall. We gained 40 units from spending less on wheat. We lost 100 units because we're spending more on rice. The total income change is a loss of 60. This change and the substitution effect means we have 60 less units, with 60 less income, less to spend. And we have to decide where are we going to cut back based on the fact that we have a lower income. Well, 75% of that cutback is on wheat. 75% of the increase is for wheat. 75% of the cutback, if it's the other way, is for wheat. So reducing of the 60% of the 60 decline in income, 75% of that will be a reduction in the consumption of wheat based on the income effect. And 25% will be a decline in the consumption of rice based on the income effect of rice. So now we'll look and see what happens as a result of that. Again, the income effect for wheat, 60%, 75% of that 60 means we reduce our spending on wheat by 45. We spend 45 less. The price is 70. That's roughly 2/3. That's a decline of 0.64. It's about almost 2/3 of a unit of wheat that we're consuming less as a result of the income change. The effect on rice is we consume 25%. So 25% of that decline of the 60 is on rice. So that means we consume 15 less. Spend 15 less on rice. The price is 50, the price hasn't changed, it's still the same price. So that means we consume 3/10 of a unit of rice less as a result of the income effect. So you can see for rice, the substitution effect says that it went up, and the income effect pushed it back in the other direction. So the total effect here, the total consumption effect, our consumption of wheat declines by 2.64 units. Our consumption of rice increases by 1.7 units. Now, the important thing to note here is, think about this intuitively, we're consuming less overall, because the drop in the consumption of wheat is more than the increase in the consumption of rice. So what's going on? Well, the price of wheat has gone up. What do? You're cutting back. I'm cutting back. I'm eating less. That's the effect. And that's shown here. That's intuitively what we would expect, and that's the outcome. So that's the kind of thing that I want you to think about, is that this is what that shows. That's something that, again, I'm making up numbers, but I get an outcome in a very basic analysis that takes all these effects into account that looks like something that's in the real world. So that's the thing that we want to do, is think about that. Now, the next step is we want to think about, well, we've looked at different points. We've looked at different points. We've got a point, a consumption of wheat. We've got different points of the consumption of wheat based on the price of wheat. So what we're now going to do, we're going to look at what happens to our consumption of wheat and the consumption of rice as the price of wheat changes. And that's this dark orange line there. This is what, and here's what's going on here. This is from the decrease, that's the point C from the decrease in the price of wheat. And this is I, C, and I, the increase in the price of wheat. So you see that that's different than on the original demand curve. So if we were gathering data, if somebody was collecting data at the grocery, let's say I'm shopping at my grocery store and they change the prices, and they get, in fact, so I shop at the grocery store and I got this card, I paid for this. Anybody have something like this? You go to the store, this is the wrong card for Aeon. I buy everything, I get discounts and the whole thing. This tells me I'm an old guy too. At any rate, what it is, they know everything about my spending at the store. Every time I buy something, it's all recorded. So they can look and see what my change in expenditure is as a result of the change. If let's say that this happened, they would see my behavior at the store. They would see that. And what they would see would be this. This is what they would see. They would see this. But they would also say, oh, well, the price increase, well, look what happened to rice, too. Look what happened to price. Oh, well, we also noticed that even though we didn't change our price for our rice, well, if when the price decreased for wheat, that's C of decrease for wheat. That's what the CBW means. I decreased my consumption of rice, so it moved from this point to this point. And then in the other direction, it goes from that point to that point. So they're going to see these points. This is the data they're going to collect on my personal spending behavior. It would look like this. So that's what they would see. What's happening is a shift. My demand curves are shifting in response to the change in the price of the other good. What they would see was their data would say, well, that's these changes in response to these changes. And if they had enough data, they would be able to figure out the income effect, the substitution effect, and the price effect. They'd be able to figure it all out. Okay, this is what they're responding. This is that part of the response is because of this part of the response is because of this part of the response is because of that. Now, let's say that you're out trying to sell something. You're working for some company, and they're trying to figure out should we raise our price, should we drop our prices, what kind of price strategy should we have? This is kind of real world stuff, guys. This isn't, and this is the kind of stuff that you might as well start learning about here, so you start figuring this stuff out. So when you go out in the real world, you actually you're already thinking about this kind of stuff, rather than waiting for them to tell you how you're supposed to think. Then you've got something to offer when you get out in the workforce. At any rate, this is what you would observe. This is what we observe. And let's say I don't have this data. All I have is this. That's what I would see. That's the point. This is what I say. Oh, that's the demand curve. That's his demand curve. They would say this is my demand curve. They would say this is his demand curve. That's the point. That's what we would see. That's what we would see at the end. That's the real world. That's what we would see. That's the effect that we would see. We'd say, oh, that's the way it looks. That's what he does. That's how he reacts. And then you get this. And then, oh, he's doing this too. Oh. And then you put it all together and separate it all out and see what all these effects are. And that helps you to figure out if you're running a store, if you're running, let's say, a retailer, and you've got all these different products, and you're trying to set your price, you try to figure out how do you maximize your revenue. Because that's what you're trying to do. That's if you're a business person, your business is trying to get as much as you can from your customers. You try to make them happy as they can, but make you as happy as you can. Everybody wants to be happy. And the more that you get, remember, more is good, more is better. The more that you get, the more happy you are. So that's the kind of thing, that's the way you want to think about this. The point here is also, we're trying to understand how people think, how they react, how they behave. That's what we're all talking about. This is all about human behavior. So now I'm going to look at two goods that are complements. Computers and computer software. I know I tried to do this last week. I was talking about iPhones and apps, and it didn't seem to work very well. So I figured, well, this one, nobody's going to argue with me about computers and software. The price of computers goes down, you buy more computers, it might be a bigger computer, and you're also probably going to buy more software. So I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. So let's have the same thing. We're going to just the same kind of demand curves, just the same as before. We'll just keep everything simple. Computers and software. And also, if you think about it, well, software is pretty expensive because companies like Microsoft charge ridiculous amounts of money. Nothing to do with the actual cost of producing it, but they can get that because they control they have the control they have over the market. God bless them. So here you're spending about the same amount on computers and software, but in the real world, that's kind of the way it is. So it's kind of realistic. Let's say on a substitution effect, they're complements. So if I buy one more unit of computers, I'll buy one more unit of software. Okay. Now, also note I'm not putting that what happens if the price of computers goes up. Has anybody seen the price of computers go up? I've never seen the price of computers go up, and I've been watching the computer market and buying computers for over 30 years, and it's never gone up. So there's no reason to assume that anything about what happens when the price of computers goes up, because it doesn't go up. So income effect, I'm going to say that 40% of the income change is spent on computers, 60% on software. A little bit different. I'm assuming a little bit of a substitution towards software, but that it's both positive. So they're complements. But if I get a little bit more money, I'm going to want to spend a little bit more on software. So that's the assumption that I'm making here. If you think that's not quite realistic for you, you might want to try your own numbers. In fact, I'll certainly have you, what I want you to do, and you watch me do this, I'm going to have you do something like this. I'm going to have you take this kind of stuff, break apart these effects, calculate them, graph them so that you can see and understand what all of these are. Price effect, computers, again, 250 to 210, same numbers as before, so that keeps it simple, plus 40. But here, the substitution effect, because they're complements, I'm consuming 2 more units of computers, but now I'm consuming also 2 more units of software with the price decline. So the net income change, computers, 250 minus 210, I have 40 more units of income as a result of the change in the price of computers. And the change in consumption due to the substitution effect, because they're complements, A to B, I have 100 less income. So I have a net income change of minus 60 here. I have less to spend because so now I have to allocate this change in income to computers and software. So that's what we're doing. First thing we do is the price effect. Then we took the price effect, the effect it has from the substitution effect. Then we take the income effect as a result of the price effect and the substitution effect. And we look at the total effect. That's what we're doing. So net income change, we equal 60. We have 60 less to spend because the change in our consumption pattern is a result of the price and substitution effect. And now we get this change in 60. This 40% is to computers. So that means we're going to spend 24 less on computers. And that means since the price is 30, the price fell, I have 24 less to spend as a result of the income effect because I'm spending more on software. So that's going to reduce my consumption of computers by 0.75. Software side is real income effect. 60% of that will go to, of that reduction is to software. A reduction of 36, less to spend. 36 and 24 is 60. 36, the price is 50, it hasn't changed. I consume 72 hundredths of a unit less, about 3/4 less, because of the income effect. So now my expenditure of that goes down from 7 to 6.28. So what that means is, and what would happen, if one gets a compliment, the price of the other one drops, well, what's going to happen is, I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend more on that, but I'm going to make an adjustment because I have less income. And the total adjustment, this says the total adjustment. So this C is where we end up. And the income effect for C means that from this price from here to here, the price from here, 50 to 30, we end up consuming 1.25 units more of computers, 1.28 units more of software. That makes about sense. The price of one is going down. They're both complements. We consume roughly the same more of the two goods. That's roughly that. So we would have, if there wasn't an income effect, we'd go out and buy 2 more units of that. But we're spending, we have more, we're spending more. And because of the income effect and the way that we allocate, and we're making the assumption of our behavior, this is a behavioral assumption, this is the end of the total effect of the change. And that kind of makes sense. You kind of consume a little bit more of both and kind of about the same. In fact, if I made 50-50, it'd be exactly pretty much, well, I think it would be the same. Let me think about that. So, and what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have you do something like this. And I want you to make an analysis like this. And when you do that, you're going to understand the price effect, the income effect, and the substitution effect decades before I did. So, it took me until now to figure this out, and you'll get to learn that this week. So that will all be smarter as a result. So I'll drink to that. Now here's the purpose of what we're doing here. One of our goals is I talked about these effects and I made assumptions. But what we want to do in the real world, we don't want to make assumptions, we want to make measurements. We want to measure things. We want to see the way people respond in the real world to such changes. That's what we want to do. And we have something, a tool, and it's called elasticity. The elasticity of demand. So the elasticity. How how elastic is demand? Does somebody have a rubber video? Anybody have a rubber video? You know them. That is, when I stretch it, something. That is, in English you call that the elasticity. How does it respond to the pressure, as I call it, the pressure? That's elasticity. So that's responding to the pressure. How does demand respond to a change in pressure? How elastic is what is the effect? If something is very elastic, then there's a high response. A high elasticity is high response. Low elasticity is low response. Price went up to 120. What did I say about it? What effect did this have on my consumption? Remember what I said? How much effect did this have on my consumption? The price went up from 110 to 120. 0. I said I didn't have any. I'm still going to buy the same amount. Okay. What's my response, my demand response to the price change? 0. My demand response is low. I had a low response. 10, it's okay. 30, then it goes up to 130, 140, I might run out somewhere else and look for it. Or I might go substitute and buy, I might run downstairs and spend 160 on this. That's a substitute. That's a response to a price change. But if I'm going to buy exactly the same amount, then my response to that price change is low. In fact, it's 0. I didn't respond. Now, if you're selling something, let's say you're selling, so you got something to sell, and the person buying, you raise the price, you raise the price, you double the price, and they say, I'll still pay it. Are you sad or are you happy? You're happy. You're getting double, you're getting twice as much, because they're still willing to pay. They're still willing to pay. God bless them. So, let's see which one's better. That one's a little bit more flavor, but for 40 yen more, nah. Not for 40 yen more. But that's the kind of decision, that's what you think. That's what you think when you go buy something. That's the kind of thinking that you make. So that's what you want to do, is go out and think about, that's what we're doing. We're trying to think about, it is about how we actually think about this. And those responses to those price changes tell us whether it's high or low. And if you are, say, a retailer, if you're analyzing your pricing strategy, you want to know this stuff. If you're a company, you want to figure it out because you're in business. You're trying to sell something. If you don't get your price right, if your price is too low, you may go out of business because you're not getting it up. And if it's too high, you may go out of business because you're not selling enough. So you got to get this right. Retailers, people that sell goods, they have to get this stuff right. They have to get it right because they got to collect, believe me, they collect data. And as we get more data in the world, more data, the ability to analyze this stuff gets more and more important. And the more people want to go out, you want to get out of here, and you want to be able to think about this stuff. So the world out there is changing very rapidly, and there's all this big data. And if you want to be a part of that, you're going to need to have some skills. And these are the kinds of skills and the kind of thinking. And that measurement here that we have is called elasticity. Price elasticity of demand. I'm going to keep that for computers. Now I'm just going to focus on the response. And again, we're just looking at the price effect. So this is going to be, I'm going to look at the price elasticity of demand. That's the response. That means the response to the change. Okay? It's like the response. It starts raining, what's your response? The price changes. What's your response? The number is the elasticity. We put a number, and we call that the price elasticity. So here's this number. Let's say we go from A to B. A to B, the price. Now, from now on, I'm going to do this PX. That's the price. Remember what I've shown you before. We're not going to use that anymore. Remember that that's what's going on. That's resources given up for 1 unit, units desired. Now I'm just going to simplify that. It's going to be PS, PX, that's the price of good X. It's computers in this case, and the quantity consumed. So from now on, that's what it's going to look like. Remember, underneath that was that's what our willingness to pay, that's all the assumptions that we're making. That's the way we're thinking about this. We're developing here a measure of the demand response to a change in the price of a good. A to B. Price drops from 50 to 30. Our demand increases from 5 to 7. We're going to put a number on that. We're going to put a number that tells us what that, to actually measure that response. Now it's 2 units, but that's from here to here. It's 2 units, but it has to do with the percentage in change in consumption with the percentage change in price. Because if it's 2 units from here to here, that can mean something different. Or if it's 1 unit from here to here, that 1 unit from here to here can mean something different than from here to here. And so we're going to, at each point, at every point on the demand curve, it can mean something different. And we'll show one of the things that you'll see clearly, one of the things that means it has to do with the amount of income that you get. The amount of revenue that you get. And that's why we care about this stuff. So the price elasticity of demand is the ratio of the percentage change in quantity demanded with a percentage change in price along the demand curve. And that's holding the price, that's a price effect. And that's holding the substitution effect and the income effect. We can say that's constant, let's not worry about that. We're just focused on this. Price elasticity of demand for good X is given by the symbol that is E of X, then the elasticity is the percentage change in the quantity divided by the percentage change in the price. That's elasticity. Over the range. In this case, we measure that, this formula. Quantity X at point B, that's 7, minus the quantity X at point A, that's 5. The change in 2, that's the change in the quantity. That's divided by the quantity change, that's 2, so the change of 2, divided by the quantity at A is 5. So that's what it changed from. And then the change, the price at point B, 30, minus the price at A, that's the change in the price, divided by the initial price, equals 30 minus 50, the new price minus the initial price divided by the initial price. That's 2 divided by 5 is 0.4, 20 divided by 50 is 0.4, 0.4 over minus 0.4 is minus 1. So that says the price elasticity of demand between points A and B, on this demand curve, is minus 1. And one of the things that you're going to see is that price elasticities are always negative. Price elasticities are always negative because demand curves are downward sloping. Now, one of the things that you'll see and especially you might see if you take another class, what they do is they turn that, they just ignore the negative sign, and they would say in this case the elasticity is 1. I want you to just think, you use this, and then if somebody tells you, yeah, well, we ignore that, that's fine. But what I want to teach you is that you're aware. And I know I've had students in the past that say, well, that's not right. It is right. This is mathematically correct. Mathematically, this is what's going on. And sometimes you're taught, they say, well, ignore that. And you ignore it, and then people forget what's actually going on. And I'd rather have you understand what's going on, and then you ignore it, because you don't, just because that's the convention. That's the convention in economics, is to ignore the minus sign in inelasticity. So what does that mean? What does this minus 1, what does that mean? What do these numbers mean? Because we're talking about the low response and the high response. But I put a number, so that minus 1, is that a low response or a high response? The answer is, here's an infinite elasticity. The price elasticity in this example between A and B is infinitely negative. That means that any change in the price, the change in price is an infinite response. Is an infinite. That's called a horizontal demand curve, which means demand is completely elastic. That is a high response. Infinite is high. Here's the price elasticity between points A and B is 0. What happened here? Price went up to 120 and consuming the same. That's this demand curve. That's my demand curve, at least between those two prices. It's straight up and down. That's how I consume the same amount. My elasticity is 0. My response is 0. If my response is 0, the elasticity, the measurement, the number that I measure based on the data is 0. This is 0 elasticity. Demand is completely inelastic. It's completely inelastic. A price elasticity between each pair of points here is minus 1. This is an example of what's called a unitary demand curve, where the price elasticity, you can make, if you make your curves a certain way, then the price elasticity in this demand curve, along between these points, the elasticity doesn't change. It's the same it's minus 1. And one of the important things about an elasticity of minus 1, very, very important. Minus 1 has an elasticity. The EX is minus 1 is an important number. The reason is that when the elasticity is minus 1, then the revenue doesn't change. The amount that I spend doesn't change. The income effect, what it means is the income effect 0. There's no income effect. So if I had a demand, if I put up a demand curve where I did the demand earlier and it was all minus 1, if it was unitary elastic, then the income effect 0. That's what that means. And if you're a retailer and you're selling, the good thing here is that if you change your price, it has no effect on your revenue. You might rise your, it might affect your profit, because maybe you're selling the same, fewer amounts of goods for the same revenue. You're happy with that. That might be the case. But your revenue doesn't change. And what happens in the extreme 0? What happens to your elasticity 0? What happened for this particular consumer here, right here, and the price went up to 120, he bought the same. What's their revenue? Their revenue increases. If the elasticity is greater than minus 1, 0 is greater than minus 1, so if the elasticity of X is greater than minus 1, that means the revenue increases. My elasticity is 0. The price goes up from 110 to 120. Their revenue increased. I'm still happy, and they're happy. There's happiness everywhere. Everybody's happy. I'm not as happy, and they're happier, but I'm still happy. Not as happy. But that's the point. That's what happens because my response is low. The response is low. This is often used for example, in tax policy, can you think of a good where taxes are high? Can you think of a good where taxes are high? Tobacco, exactly. Tobacco taxes are high. Why are tobacco taxes high? Let's see. Let's look down there. If I look out the window there, what do you like? If you're looking at the right spot outside of this building, what are you going to see? People doing what? Smoking. There's going to be people smoking out there. So even if it's raining, they're going to be smoking. If it's cold, they're smoking. They're going to smoke. I mean, these are people that, why? Because they smoke. And tobacco is something that has a certain addictive quality. And so you keep on doing it, even if, this is an example, we're talking about response. They go out and smoke if it's sunny, if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's day, or if it's night. They're going to go out and do the same thing. They don't care. And that also, in other words, there's no response to any of those environmental changes. Well, they also don't respond to a price change. Smokers don't respond to a price change. If the price goes up, they still pretty much smoke the same. You kind of smoke kind of the same. You won't reduce your consumption. If you raise the price enough, yes. But to some degree, you're going to smoke the same. So if you're the government, that's a great thing to tax. Because you raise the tax and you get more revenue, and they still buy it. People still buy cigarettes. That's the point. So the government knows that. The government knows that the elasticity is low. That's why they tax. That's why tobacco is taxed that way. Alcohol is kind of taxed the same way. In the U.S., they're finding marijuana has become legal in many states in the U.S., cannabis. And the governments are finding that they're making lots of money. There's taxing, they're making much more money than they imagine. Because people are willing to spend, they double the price and they spend twice as much. Because people don't care, they want that. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of thing. So those kinds of things, those kinds of products, you can tax. You can put a tax on. Price, where the demands respond here, this is like, if they raise it by 1 yen, and I'd say forget it, I'll never buy this again. That's an infinite response. I'll never buy this again. Not one, if they raise it 1 yen, forget it. That's an infinite response, and they lose all the revenue. That's an elasticity equals to infinity. Minus infinity. That's this. So these things are real. And the point is that we can put a number on it. We put a number, and the number has a meaning. The number has a meaning because what it says is that, let me just write this. Let me write this here so we keep it straight. It says that if the elasticity of x equals 1, your revenue of x stays the same. No change. If the elasticity of x is greater than -1, then the revenue increases. That's low response. If the elasticity of x is less than -1, then the revenue falls. That's the important, and that's why it matters. That's why we care. That's why you care about that. Because it matters on your revenue. And we can put a number on it. And when we measure, we're measuring what that effect is. Now what we've done so far is we talk about between 2 points. But in fact, we're not interested in 2 points. I'll show you why. I've got this. This is, I want you to go over this. You had the kakikori example. Now I've put some elasticities on that. We may get back to that a little bit later. Let me now go through this. 10, 11 minutes. we can determine elasticity between any 2 points on the demand curve, since every point of the demand curve represents the amount of the good demand for a given price. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the A and B. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get closer and closer. B. Closer and closer. We start with C. We take a point C. This is the demand elasticity between points A and B on the early page 53 is -1. Now we have placed at point C the value Qx equals 6, Px equals 40. We can then calculate the demand elasticity between points B and C using the formula. 7 minus 6 divided by 6 over 30 minus 40 divided by 40. This QXB, this formula. So you're looking at that price change. And it's minus 0.667. So minus 0.667. That is greater than -1. Greater than -1 means your income, your revenue rises between the points. So let's look at that. Our revenue here, 240. Our revenue, it's between these 2 points. The let's see. Now going from here to here, what it means is if you rise the revenue, if you rise the price, your revenue increases. That's what's happening. So this minus 0.667 is greater than -1. It's greater than -1. So if we increase from B to C, our revenue goes up. That's what happens. So that greater than -1. So it's minus 0.667. We first had -1. Remember -1, A to B, the revenue is the same. It's 210. 40% fall, 40% fall in price. 40% fall in price, 40% rise. I'm standing up here. Why is this doing this? It's funny, I'm standing and suddenly, because sometimes this happens when you teach, and suddenly you get to some point and you say, and you get confused and you try to think on your feet and you say, or something. Well, I'm going to have to go back and think about this because I know what I'm saying, but I'm going to have to think to get my thinking straight, and I can't quite get it straight right this moment. Well, I'll get it straight, but we'll get that. But the point that we're going to see, and I'll clarify the other when I have time to think about this, which will be before the next class. As you get closer and closer to this point, as you move closer and closer to this number slowly increases. It goes from 0.667, then we get to a point B and D, we get closer, it goes to minus 0.554, and then if we go further, we get to 6.75, 32.5, it goes to 0.481. If we get to 6.875 or 3.125, it's minus 0.455. And then we go to 6.99, 30.1, we get closer, 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 0.431, and as you get closer, it approaches, you can see the number, and it's getting less. So you get closer and closer and closer, and there's a limit, and and I'll show you the problem is that as you get to, when you get the limit, and let's say you get closer and closer, these two values approach 0 as a limit. However, if you use this formula here, to calculate the elasticity in the range, when the range is 0, When 2 points are the same, you get 0 over 0, and that's infinite. And it's meaningless. It has no meaning. So the problem is at the limit, you can't use this formula. That simple formula will tell you the elasticity between 2 points, but at a point you can't use it. So what does that mean? Well, we have to use a different type of mathematics. And the type of mathematics we have to use is calculus. It's just very simple. It's just very simple calculus. How many people have taken calculus? How many people are intending to take calculus? How many people do I recommend to take calculus? I recommend that you all take calculus. And you're going to have a basic background. We're going to give you a basic background in calculus here, because you need calculus in order to do economics. So, there. So does everybody know what calculus is? And so here, what calculus is calculus just simply tells us what happens at a point. That's what happens at a point. And so we have to know, since we only at the point, we're going to find out what's the elasticity at the point. We have to do, and what calculus tells us, what's the instantaneous change? Because what we're doing is we've had two points, and they're different, so we can see the change between them, but when they get to 0, we have to have a mathematics that tells us instantaneously what's happening, and that's calculus. Okay. So calculus here, the equation to calculate the elasticity at a point. The elasticity, it's the price of X at the point B over the quantity consumed, the price over the quantity, times the first derivative of the quantity, the instantaneous change in the quantity with the change in price. Because that's what we're interested in. We're looking at the response. What's the change in quantity with the change in price? And the instantaneous change in quantity with the change in price is the derivative, the first derivative of the quantity with respect to the price. So what we have to do then is get a formula. To calculate that, we need to know the derivative of the demand curve at this point. The demand curve here is given by the equation. If you go back, that's the equation. That's the equation of the demand curve. Since we need it in this form, the derivative of the quantity with respect to the price, we have to rewrite it here. Quantity equals 10 minus the price of X over 10. And this is where you do calculus. It's not very hard, but you have to understand it. The first derivative of the demand equation with respect to the price Px, the demand, it's the derivative of Qx, P of Qx over Px equals 0.1. That's minus 1. You've got to change that. I made that mistake before, that's minus 0.1. And then you put that in that equation, it's minus 0.42857. So you remember how close we were when we got close. Minus 0.42857, where before was minus 0.488. So you see how close we got? So in calculus, this calculates, that's the price elasticity at that point. That says that if you make an infinitesimal change in the price at that point, that's the response. That is the response at that point. That's what that means. And that's ultimately what you want to do, is you want to get the price elasticity at any point. And then that's going to tell you what your revenue is. Now I'm going to sit down and, like I say, I'm going to get straighten that out, which I will next week. I apologize for that. But we will, like I say, one of the things that I've learned, sometimes you make mistakes, but also you get confused. There's a lot of things to remember here. So which also should tell you, don't worry too much. Just try to figure out, learn what you can, get straight what you can, and eventually you do figure this stuff out. It might take a long time, but now the cross-price elasticity of demand. See, this is where we're talking about, this is something now, this is similar to the price elasticity. Now these are different kinds of measurements. And in fact, what these are going to do is to tell us how to look, like this is related to the substitution effect. So remember we talked about the substitution effect, the income effect, the price effect. Well, you have elasticities for all of those. And that's the point, is that we want to find what are all these different elasticities? How do people respond to these things? Here's the substitution effect. This says, if we raise the cross-price elasticity, says what's the response of the quantity of X, and the consumption of good X, in a change in the price of Y. What's the response of the consumption of rice with the change in the price of wheat? What's the response in the consumption of software with the change in the price of computers? That's what that means. And that's in terms of price elasticity. Your substitute goods have a cross-price elasticity greater than 0. Your complementary goods have a cross-price elasticity less than 0. We'll have exercises and you can work all this out. Just laying this out now. Again, that's related to substitution effect. That's why I laid all of this stuff out. We broke all that down. The reason is because ultimately we want to be able to have this kind of measurement. We separate out all of those effects and measure each one of them. And if you can think, well, why would you want to know? If you're selling good, if you're selling rice, you want to know what happens if the price of wheat changes. What happens if your competitors change their price? If people's incomes are going up, how's that going to affect the demand for your good? If incomes are falling because it's a recession, how are people going to change? How do you need to respond? How are people going to respond? How the changes you need to make? Those are the kind of basic things that we're interested in. And finally, that's the income elasticity. That's related to the income effect. There, we're out of time. So I will get this out to you. I'll go back and think about what I got confused about there and fix that. But go over this. I'm going to have your exercises this week are going to involve you separating out those effects, as I've done today, the income effect, the price effect, the substitution effect, and the income effect. And you'll have exercises on that. And then we'll go next week, and we'll have you do exercises on elasticity and actually measuring what that means. We'll get that step by step. So, and I just want to, nobody got I sent out an invitation for people to go to the YouTube site, and nobody got that? Did anybody get that? I sent out an invitation. What they did was they said, okay, in YouTube, when I uploaded this to the channel, I created a channel, I uploaded it, and it said, send people an invitation. So put all your addresses in, sent the invitation, and it looks like nobody got it. Nobody got it. Great. Well, and since that happened in the other class, as well, I'll just have to do it directly. I'll send you an email message showing you where to go so you can see all this stuff on YouTube. So you'll be able now to listen. You'll be able to listen to all this over and over again. And your comprehension of English is going to be much better. Hey. See? As I speak so clearly, my accent is so clear, so good. You no?
Actually, yes.
I know I talk fast. That's fine. I talk
Not that fast, I think.